Good morning, girls. In the previous session of Oracle, we learned how to create a view. We have gone through some examples of view, right? Then we learned how to create a force view and one more type of view, that was updatable view. Now today's session we are going to cover one more Oracle object, that is sequence. Let us begin with the meaning of sequence. Here on the screen you can see that what is sequence is described. Sequence. The sequence is an object that generates numeric values for Oracle tables, right? An Oracle sequence is named sequential number generator. The sequence is object that generates numeric values. It is an independent object and can be used with any table that require its output. Usually the sequence is used to enter the data in a primary key field of table to maintain unique values. In multi-user environment, when many users do entry simultaneously, there is a possibility of use of same key may be entered by user. This can be avoided by using sequence, right? Like constraints, sequences exist only in the data dictionary, not in the memory. Sequence can be configured to increase or decrease without bound or to repeat upon reaching a bounding value. Here on the screen you can see the syntax of sequence. Create sequence, the name of sequence you have to specify. Then there are some options for a sequence object. These are increment by, start with, max value, mean value, cycle or no cycle. Let us understand these options one by one. The first one is start with. This parameter defines the first number of sequence. The default is 1. That means sequence begin from the value 1. If you want to start your sequence from any specific number, you can accordingly adjust this parameter, right? Second option is increment by. This parameter defines the increase or decrease value, increment or decrement for your sequence value for subsequently generated numbers. Even you can set the negative number by setting a negative increment by, right, for decreasing values. Next is mean value. Mean value, the lowest number the sequence will generate. This is the bounding value in a decreasing sequence. The default mean value is the keyword no mean value, which is 1 for an increasing sequence and to minus 10 raised to 26 for a decreasing sequence. Next is max value, the largest number that the sequence will generate. This is bounding value in an increasing sequence. The default max value is the keyword no max value, which is 10 raised to 27 for an increasing sequence and minus 1 for a decreasing sequence. The next parameter is cycle, which repeats the whole sequence after reaching the bounding value. It begins from the first value of your sequence. Next parameter is no cycle. This parameter says that sequence value will not be repeated after reaching the bounding value. This is the default. When you try to generate the max value plus 1, an exception will be raised. One more parameter is there, that is catch, which is not mentioned over here. You can set the value for catch, which define the size of the block of sequence number held in memory. The default is 20. Let us generate a sequence by our SQL editor. For that we need to open SQL Plus window. Here we want to create a one sequence which start with number 1, which increase by number 1. The maximum value I want to generate is 10, right? So for that we will write create sequence. These are our keywords, create sequence. Then specify the name of sequence, SQ_3. The name defined for this sequence is SQ_3, which start with 1. So we will specify start with 1. Don't forget to put a space between these two words, start and with, right? Then increment by 1. I want to increase this value by 1. For that I will write increment by 1. The maximum value where I want to reach is 10 only, right? The maximum value is 10. Now semicolon and press enter. Here we got the message sequence created. That means the sequence with name SQ_3 is created. Now you can use the sequence wherever you want to enter these values 1 to 10 in a proper way, right? Let us try to understand through one more example. Here first we will create one table with name employee1, which has two columns, namely ID and name, right? Create one structure. Create table employee1. Here this table has two columns with header, ID and a name. We got the message table created. Now create a sequence. Employee ID, start with 5, increment by 5, max value is 15 and no cycle, right? And no cycle. Before we create a new sequence, let us insert a one value in employee1. Insert into employee1 values. What we always do, we pass a static value instead of this line, right? But now I don't want to insert this value manually. For that what we have to do is we can use sequence instead of static value. That's why we need a sequence before we insert a record in employee1. So our next task is to create a sequence with name employee ID, start with 1, increment by 1, max value is 15 and no cycle. Okay, sequence is created. We start with 1 and increment by 1. The maximum value for this sequence is 15, and I don't want to create a cycle of numbers, so here I have passed one parameter, namely no cycle. Now insert a record in your employee table. How to insert a value of sequence in our table? So observe the selected part of this query. Here I wrote emp underscore id dot next12, emp underscore id next12 instead of a static value, right? Next12 will return the current value of our sequence. Next12 may be used to generate the next value. So here, using a sequence name followed by next12 function, you will get a new value for your sequence. Let me press enter, and let me select all the records of employee 1 table. Here it is. You can see the ID inserted in employee 1 table. This ID is inserted through empid dot next12. Let me insert one more record in employee 1. Again, select all the records from employee table. See, notice the ID field of this table, right? Automatically insert a new value, that too in proper way. Okay, if I write increment by 2, then in that case I will get 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 and 15, right? After 15 I will not get a value 17. Why? Because here I have set the maximum value for this sequence is 15. Fine, let us go back to our document. You can simply get the value through this query. Select sequence.name.next12. Here replace the sequence name with your sequence. For example, emp underscore id is a name of my sequence. So I will write emp underscore id dot next12. Next12 from dual. Dual is a temporary table where we can store our result on temporary basis, right? The next value is 3. Even you can find the current value. Okay, current value is 3 because 2 is already used by us, so the current value is 3, and next will also return 3. Okay, next example. Here I want to create a sequence with name empid2, start with 1, increment by 5, max value is 25, and I want to create a cycle. Okay, space is required. Here you can see the sequence is created. Create sequence, employee ID 2, start with 1, which increase by 2, max value 10, and cycle catch 4. Max value is 10, cycle catch 4. This will repeat the cycle after reaching at max value 10 and begin with 1. Okay. You can insert the value of employee ID in your employee table for testing purpose. Right? Dot next 12, comma, name is Sita, here no constraint is applied on this table, right? So we'll be able to insert the same value Now observe this sequence. 1 2 was previously inserted by employee underscore ID 1 sequence, and the other values 1 3 5 7 9, right, which is inserted by employee ID 2. Here the cycle is over, so it started entering the number from our started number, that is first in this case, that is 1 in this case, right, and repeats the value. Similarly, create one more cycle, create sequence employee ID 3, start with 1, increment by 2. Here set the value, max value 10. We want to create a cycle, set the catch 5. Something wrong. Yes, here we need a space. Okay, the sequence with name emp underscore id3 is created. We will cover some more example of sequence in the next session. Thank you.